Hi, my name's Rowena. I lived in this house for over 40 years. I raised 3 kids here. I buried my husband here. And yet, one morning, I found a listing online, my house for sale, photos of my bedroom, my kitchen, even my pantry public, and posted without my knowledge. My son and his girlfriend said it was for my own good. Then came the bank account, the forged papers, the eviction notice, all signed by my own children. But the worst part, the way they smiled through it all, like I wouldn't notice, like I wouldn't fight back. Do you know what it feels like to become a guest in your own life, to be erased without anyone raising their voice because I do? And I wonder, how many others out there do? Too, I woke up to the distant hum of lawnmowers and the scent of dew on magnolia leaves. The house, as always, greeted me with its familiar creaks and sighs, old bones stretching after another night of stillness. I moved slowly, not from pain, but from habit, letting my fingers trace the woodwork of the banister as I made my way down the stairs. The coffee pot gurgled its morning tune while I clipped a few yellowing leaves from the magnolia tree just outside the kitchen window. That tree had been Benedict's pride. He planted it when Ephraim was born and said we'd watch it grow with our boy. Now, it towered past the second story, throwing soft shadows across the kitchen tiles where I read the morning paper with a pencil in hand, still circling typos like I had when I taught 5th grade. Benedict had been gone 3 months, not long enough to stop hearing his whistle in the hallway, too long to justify still setting out 2 mugs. I tried to shake the melancholy off and focus on the crossword, but my thoughts kept drifting. Something had been off lately. My kids, Callista, Leora, even Ephraim had been distant, rushed in their conversations, eyes flicking elsewhere. I chalked it up to grief, but some part of me, it knew. After finishing my toast, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The usual rhythm of checking my email, scrolling the neighborhood watch group, and looking at dog rescue updates gave me a sense of normalcy. But then my finger slipped, and I clicked a link in the sidebar, a local real estate ad. I froze. There it was, my house, my blue shutters, my cream trim, my kitchen with the very table I was sitting at now gleaming under bright, intrusive lighting, a real estate listing with full photos, floor plans, and the caption, "Ideal starter home, move-in ready." I blinked, unsure if I was dreaming. My breath caught. I clicked the link again, then once more, refreshing the page. I hadn't listed my house. I hadn't even considered moving, but someone had. The more I scrolled, the deeper the chill grew. Every room had been photographed, my bedroom, my pantry shelves still stocked with Benedict's favorite cereal, my sewing corner where I kept unfinished quilts. This wasn't a future dream. It was a current reality. My home, my sanctuary, was up for sale, and I had no idea who had done it. I dialed Ephraim's number with trembling fingers. It rang and rang. No answer. I left a message I barely remembered speaking, just a jumbled mix of "call me back" and "what is this?" As I set the phone down, memories from recent weeks tumbled in. Ephraim had stopped by last Saturday. He'd brought Seraphine with him, that new girlfriend with the perfect ponytail and laugh that sounded rehearsed. They had said they were just helping me declutter. He had asked where I kept my birth certificate, but I hadn't thought much of it. Now I did. That feeling, the one I had ignored, returned like a bruise blooming under skin. Maybe it had never been about grief. Maybe it had been about control. Still, I held on to hope like a fool. Maybe it was a mistake, a clerical error. Maybe someone uploaded the wrong address. But deep down, I already knew. The knock on the door startled me. I hadn't even noticed the time. It was Miss... Ivy, my neighbor from across the street. She leaned on her cane and smiled wide. "So," she asked cheerily, "when's the big move?" I blinked at her, confused. "I'm sorry, the sign's coming up tomorrow, right. Seraphine said you were downsizing." My mouth went dry. I must have looked dazed because she tilted her head. "Oh, honey," she said. "I thought you knew. Your kids were hauling boxes out last weekend. Ephraim and the blonde gal. They were all over the lawn." I tried to remember. I had been at the church food drive that day. "I didn't know," I said slowly. "Ms." Ivy looked embarrassed. "Well, I suppose it's not my business. Just thought you were finally moving on. This place must hold so many memories." It did. Too many. I thanked her and closed the door gently, my face burning. I had been the last to know about my own house. I wandered back into the kitchen, my limbs suddenly heavy. I sat at the table and pulled Benedict's recipe notebook toward me. The cover was worn, the pages smudged with flour and ink. I flipped through it, searching for something I couldn't name. Steadiness, maybe. Familiarity. One page caught my eye, a scribbled note in the margins next to his pecan pie recipe. "For Ro, this one's always yours." I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the wet streaks hit my hands. Outside, a car door slammed. I stiffened, ears perked. Footsteps approached the front porch, heavy, deliberate. My eyes locked on the door. I didn't know who it would be, but I knew this. This was still my house. But for how much longer? The knock came again this time, sharper, more deliberate. I hesitated before opening the door, a pit forming in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Standing there, dressed in a soft peach blouse and tailored slacks, was Seraphine Maddox. She smiled like we were old friends sharing a casual morning visit. "Rowena," she said brightly, as if tasting my name for the first time. "So good to see you." She held a slim leather folder tucked under her arm, the kind that usually meant someone wanted something signed. Before I could respond, she stepped forward, not quite pushing past me, but with enough confidence that I found myself stepping aside. "I brought some papers for you to look over," she said as she waltzed into my living room like it belonged to her. "Let's sit for just a moment." She made herself comfortable in Benedict's old recliner. My breath hitched. She didn't ask, she didn't wait. She simply moved forward like someone rehearsing a role. And I, inexplicably, let her. She opened the folder with a smooth flick of her wrist, revealing a stack of documents held together by a gold clip. I saw my name printed at the top of the first page, in a crisp serif font that suddenly made my skin feel tight. "I've been helping the kids with some of the estate paperwork," she began. "They asked me to walk you through this so it wouldn't feel overwhelming." She turned the paper toward me. It was a transfer of property agreement. My house, my address, my name. But there, already scrawled in ink, were the signatures of Ephraim and Callista. The only space left blank was mine. She tapped the signature line with a manicured fingernail. "You don't need to overthink. The children said you'd understand." My throat dried. Understand what? Exactly. That the house is too much for you now, and this way, everything stays tidy. You won't have to worry. Her voice was syrupy, slow, comforting. If I hadn't known better, but I did. This wasn't an offer. It was an assumption. A handover disguised as help. Before I could find words sharp enough to cut through the fog in my head, Seraphine rose. "I'll leave this here for you to review. No pressure, but we do need it soon." She walked to the door, turned back with a dazzling smile, and said, "You'll feel better once it's all behind you." The door clicked shut. I stared at the folder, my name staring back, and felt something inside me loosen then shift. I called Ephraim the moment she was out of sight. Voicemail. I tried again. Still nothing. I paced the kitchen, the kettle whistling shrilly behind me as I let it boil dry. Then, a chime. A text. From Ephraim. Just take a look at this. Mom. We've talked it through. Attached was a link to a Google Doc titled Long-Term Living Options for Mom, reviewed by Seraphine Maddox. The name hit me harder than the contents. I clicked. Inside were notes and plans, housing communities, memory care facilities, budget breakdowns, each one with commentary, and all of it placed neatly in a folder titled Concern Aging Parent. My breath caught in my chest. They weren't helping me. They were managing me. I closed the laptop with a soft click and stood still in the quiet. Then I walked up to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, hands gripping the quilt Benedict and I had chosen for our 25th anniversary. His photo sat on the nightstand. That easy grin, the deep lines around his eyes that I used to trace with my fingers in the dark. It watched me now, saying nothing. Seraphine. He once called her efficient but boundaryless. I remembered it clearly now, tossed off after a work event she had helped organize. At the time, I had laughed. Now, it sounded like prophecy. I picked up my planner and flipped to today's date, and in clean, measured script, I wrote, "They are giving away what I built," without even telling me. That evening, I made my tea twice as strong. I stood in the pantry and reached up to the top shelf, pulling down a manila envelope I hadn't touched in years. Inside were utility bills, tax records, the original deed, my name, Benedict's name. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal. It was cold, crisp, the paper untouched by time. This wasn't just paperwork. It was my life. My proof. My hands trembled, but not from weakness. I wasn't sure yet what I would do, but I knew I would do something. The morning sun was already high when I walked into the East Baton Rouge clerk's office, a file folder tucked under my arm like armor. The room was cool, quiet, and smelled faintly of toner and old carpeting. I took a number and sat in one of the orange plastic chairs, the kind that creaked when you shifted your weight. I didn't move. When my number flashed on the screen, I approached the counter, careful not to let my voice tremble. "I need a copy of the property title for 416 Magnolia Lane," I said, sliding over a worn utility bill with the address highlighted. The clerk, a young man with a name tag that read TY, tapped at his keyboard, humming along to whatever played through his earbuds. After a pause, he squinted at the screen and looked at me, puzzled. "Ma'am, this property is no longer under your name." My heartbeat skipped. "I'm sorry." He turned the monitor slightly, pointing at the line that read, "Current owner, Seraphine Maddox, executed by family representatives." I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the counter. "Can you print that?" He nodded, clicked twice, and the printer behind him whirred to life. I took the printout in both hands. My name was gone. Gone. Back home. I stood in the foyer holding the paper like it might dissolve. My own name had vanished from the deed, like it had never belonged there. I sat down slowly on the bench by the window and stared at the wall across from me. It used to have a framed watercolor I painted with Benedict on a rainy weekend, but now it was blank. A memory rose the night we painted the front door. The rain poured, and Benedict insisted we do it anyway, laughing as the brush slipped in his hands. I remembered the two of us standing there, dripping and proud, as he scrawled the Vosses on the mailbox with a Sharpie. The Vosses. I whispered. I wandered into the living room, the printout still in my hand. At first glance, everything looked as it always had. But then no. That rug. I hadn't bought that rug. and the sideboard I'd put it in storage 3 years ago after Benedict passed. It was back now, right where it had once stood. The curtains had changed, too. They were lighter, newer, and unfamiliar. But it wasn't until I reached the hallway that I stopped cold. The photograph. Where there had once been our wedding photo, me in lace, Benedict with his crooked bow tie, there was now a glossy, color photograph of Seraphine and Benedict, laughing at some company picnic. I opened the hallway cabinet with trembling hands and found our photo, bent, half wrapped in paper, shoved into a drawer like an afterthought. My hands didn't shake as I removed the picnic photo from the wall. I didn't say a word. I placed our wedding photo back where it belonged, smoothing the edges, straightening the frame. I stared at it, not with nostalgia, but with determination, as if trying to recall what dignity used to feel like when it had a name mine. That evening, I opened the small drawer under the kitchen counter, junk mail and circulars spilled out, as always. But then I noticed a new stack envelopes addressed not to me, but to current occupant. I flipped through them. One was a flyer from a retirement community across town. My name was handwritten inside, circled with a note, private tour available Thursday. I sat down on the hallway bench and turned the light on, then off, then on again. The switch clicked each time, sharp and final. They were making choices for me. And for the first time, I began to wonder what else they had already taken. The folding chairs at the community center squeaked under shifting weight. I sat near the back, behind a column, next to the buffet table draped in wrinkled linen. From here, I could barely see the podium, only the backs of heads and the occasional tilt of Seraphine's blonde bob as she stepped forward to speak. Benedict's memorial had been arranged by my children. I found out about it from a forwarded email. The invitation read, "Please join us in celebrating the life of Benedict Voss, remembered by his closest family and friends." There was no mention of me, just logistics. Seraphine adjusted the microphone and smiled. Benedict was a man of quiet strength. She began, her voice smooth. In his final years, he found new clarity, purpose, and peace. He confided in me often. I blinked slowly. She continued. We'd sit for hours talking about his dreams, his regrets, his hopes for the future. He told me once that he finally felt understood. Not a single reference to our 42 years of marriage. Not one. I sat frozen in my chair, feet planted firmly on the scuffed linoleum floor, as the audience murmured polite chuckles and nods of agreement. After the ceremony, people mingled over fruit punch and store-bought cookies. I moved quietly through the room, invisible as ever, near the windows. I overheard Callista talking to one of Benedict's old co-workers. Sandra gave Dad purpose again, she said lightly, using Seraphine's nickname. The woman nodded sympathetically. It's wonderful he had someone at the end. I stepped forward. Callista. She turned, smile flickering, then vanishing. Oh, Mom, I didn't see you. I heard what you said, I replied evenly. That Sandra gave him purpose. Callista shrugged. You didn't even want to be involved in planning. We thought it was best to let Seraphine handle it. Her words hit like the tail end of a slap. I felt the heat crawl up my throat but said nothing, just nodded, turned, and walked away, my jaw tight enough to ache. When I got home, Nolan ran to the door, clutching a crumpled piece of construction paper. I made this for Grandma, he announced proudly, holding up a drawing of a house with a dog and stick figures. I smiled, touched. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Thank you. For Grandma, the one who lives with us now, he clarified. My hand paused mid-air. You mean me? He frowned, looked behind him. No, Grandma who cooks with Daddy. She helped me draw the dog. I didn't correct him. Not really. I just touched his shoulder and said I'd hang the drawing on the fridge, but later. I folded it and placed it inside my purse, next to the photo I'd tucked there a week ago. The magnolia tree in the backyard had begun to bloom again. I sat beside it that evening, the breeze heavy with scent, the air just humid enough to curl my hair at the edges. Benedict planted this tree on our 10th anniversary. We'd had a fight that morning over nothing, really, but by afternoon he came home with a shovel and a sapling. Because we keep growing, he said, even when it's messy. I whispered to the tree. He never meant for her to take this from me. My voice cracked, but I didn't. I wouldn't. Later that night, I pulled out the old photo album from the hallway closet, the blue one with the frayed spine. I flipped through page after page birthdays, anniversaries, school plays, my name handwritten under every caption, always in Benedict's neat block letters. I reached the page with our trip to New Mexico, Benedict in his sunglasses, me holding a map upside down. He'd called that photo proof we never knew where we were going, but we went anyway. I tore it out, folded it neatly, slipped it into my purse alongside the drawing. I didn't know what I was keeping them for, only that they belonged close. The voicemail blinked on my phone just as I poured a second cup of tea, the kind I brewed when my thoughts wouldn't stop circling the same wound. Ephraim's name glowed on the screen. I braced myself. Then his voice came through curt, formal, rehearsed. "Mom," he began. "I know you're upset, but we need you to stop making this harder than it has to be." He exhaled like a man holding more than he wanted to say. "Seraphine's been guiding us through this process. She understands what Dad would have wanted. Please don't sabotage what we're trying to preserve." The word landed like glass against stone. Sabotage. I deleted the message, but it played on loop in my head, the way only cruelty spoken as reason can. Still holding the phone, I leaned on the kitchen counter, my knuckles turning white. The morning light, warm and syrupy through the window, felt wrong, like it didn't belong in a world where my son thought I was the problem. I didn't answer. Not with words. Later that afternoon, I was scrubbing out the teapot when Callista's voice filtered through from the living room. She was on speakerphone, her tone light, efficient. The kind of voice people used when planning a business lunch. "Yes," a male voice said on the other end. "If we frame it as early-stage cognitive decline, guardianship can be expedited. Emotional unpredictability. Episodes of confusion, those are key indicators." Callista gave a small, polished laugh. "She's always been sensitive. This won't be hard." I dropped the teapot lid into the sink. It clanged like a gunshot. My hand stayed frozen in the air. I didn't say a word. That evening, I found 3 brochures tucked into the Sunday paper. All 3 advertised senior living communities. Pastel smiles, manicured lawns, slogans like "Live where you're cared for" and "Dignity." Every day. One had a yellow sticky note on the front, "Mom, just something to think about." See, that was when I went to the hutch in the hallway, the one no one ever dusted but me, and pulled out a yellow legal pad from the drawer beneath the napkins. At the top, I wrote people who said they loved me and what they're trying to take. Underneath, 3 names: Ephraim, Callista, Seraphine. Then I added one more, in capital letters, me, because I had allowed this too long. I had smiled and nodded when they said I was just overthinking. I had made excuses when Ephraim stopped calling as often. When Callista began using words like manageable and manageable, clearly meant me. That night, I sat at the dining table alone. The overhead light hummed quietly. I reached for the manila folder I hadn't opened since Benedict died, marked House Docs. I pulled out old tax returns, warranty deeds, a letter from the county clerk confirming our co-ownership. My signature was everywhere next to his, beneath his, sometimes above. I wasn't a placeholder. I was a partner. A memory rose Benedict telling Ephraim during a home repair project. Your mom knows these pipes better than I do. She built more of this place than I ever did. I had brushed it off then, laughing, but now I held onto it like a lifeline. The next morning, I stood by the window as the first light warmed the magnolia leaves. The house was silent, but something had changed in the quiet. Not a surrender, a stillness that steadied. I picked up the phone. "Mr. Hatch," I said. My voice did not waver. He answered warmly. "Rowena, it's been years. I need to know what's mine," I said, "and I need to prove it." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. His pause spoke of understanding. "Come in tomorrow," he said. "Bring whatever you've got." I hung up and sat down, the yellow legal pad in front of me. I underlined the name me. I poured another cup of tea. This time, it was strong, sharp, the kind that doesn't need sugar to taste like resolve. Before I went to bed, I passed the hallway mirror and paused. My reflection looked older. Yes, but not small, not weak. I straightened my shoulders. I ran a hand over my sweater, smoothing nothing in particular. Upstairs, I pulled down the box from the closet labeled "just in case." Inside were things I hadn't looked at in years, copies of the will Benedict and I drafted, a thumb drive labeled "Home Finances," Voss, and a faded note in Benedict's handwriting to be reviewed with Rowena if needed. It was needed now. I spread it all across the bed, carefully, deliberately, as if building a wall between myself and the version of me they were trying to erase. Later, while brushing my teeth, I caught sight of a small corner of paper peeking from beneath the bathroom rug. I bent to pick it up. It was a crayon drawing of our house. Nolan had drawn it lopsided, cheerful, full of color. On the porch were two stick figures. One had yellow hair, the other was labeled me. No third figure. I stood there staring at it. They hadn't just tried to steal the roof over my head. They were stealing the story of who I had been under it. I walked back to the bedroom and tucked the drawing into my yellow pad, not as evidence, as reminder. The night stretched long, but I slept without tossing. They thought I wouldn't fight. They were wrong. The certified letter arrived at noon, slipped quietly between bills and supermarket flyers as if it were just another mundane envelope, but the gold seal and embossed logo from Maddox Estate Legal Services told a different story. I sat at my kitchen table, hands unmoving, eyes fixed on the unbroken edge of the envelope, as if it could remain unopened and keep the truth from unraveling. Eventually, I slid it open with a butter knife. Inside, a single-page notice written in dense legalese informed me that my residence was no longer legally considered my primary domicile. The house I had lived in for 42 years, the home where I'd raised Ephraim, taught Nolan how to make Christmas ornaments, and nursed Benedict through his final days, all of it reduced to one line, one lie, in one letter. Signed at the bottom were two names, Seraphine Maddox and, beneath hers, in smaller script, Ephraim Voss. There had been no discussion, no phone call, not even a hallway whisper of warning. The next morning, I stepped into the dim, wood-paneled office of Mr. Hatch Benedict's former accountant. He was mostly retired now, but when I called, he answered with the same warmth he always had. "Rowena." "Of course." "Come in, let's see what we can make of this." I handed him the eviction letter. He took one glance at the signature, sighed, and opened his ancient desktop system with a few practiced clicks. He pulled up estate records, the original deed, Benedict's will. After a few moments, he leaned back and folded his hands over his belly. "Rowena," he said gently, "your name is still listed on the survivorship deed. No override has been filed. Legally, this house is yours. I felt the heat rise in my chest, not panic, not relief. Something steadier. Something righteous. They didn't think I'd check. I said quietly, "No, they didn't." He replied, "At the bank." I stood behind an elderly couple depositing coins into a savings account. The teller smiled at them. When it was my turn, her smile faltered. "I'd like to make a withdrawal from my checking," I said. She pulled up my account and blinked. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Voss. This account was flagged for protection and temporarily suspended." Flagged by whom, she hesitated. It says, "Seraphine Maddox, and there's a new joint account set up in your name, co-managed. Who authorized that?" Another pause. Her eyes flicked nervously to her manager's desk. "Your son, ma'am, Mr. Ephraim Voss." For a long moment, I didn't speak. Then I held out my hand. "Print me everything." Back home, I cleared the dining room table. I laid out the eviction letter on the left, the bank documents on the right, and Mr. Hatch's printed copy of the deed at the center. I labeled each sheet with sticky notes: forgery risk, POA misuse, unauthorized co-management. I opened a new notebook and titled the first page, "What They Think I Won't Understand." I drew columns, dates, signatures, names. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I simply began. That night, I sat at my kitchen desk, the same spot where I once helped Ephraim practice cursive, and drafted a letter addressed to Davenport and Price, LLP, a law firm that had once represented a friend during a messy inheritance battle. I didn't know if they'd take my case. I didn't care. The letter read plainly. No emotion, just facts, dates, attachments, and a final line. My family may have assumed I'd go quietly, but they forgot who built this house. Then I folded it, sealed it, and placed it beside the front door. Tomorrow, I would mail it. Seraphine arrived on a Thursday morning, holding a tray with 2 iced coffees and a smile that could have cut glass. She didn't knock, just rang the bell once and waited like she owned the welcome. "Hi, Rowena," she chirped as I opened the door. "I thought we might clear the air." She walked past me without waiting for permission, her heels clicking against the hardwood like punctuation. She placed the tray on the kitchen counter and looked around with a gaze too rehearsed to be curious. "We've all been so tense," she said, her tone light, almost sing-song. "But I want you to know none of this is personal. We just want what's best for everyone." I folded my arms, said nothing. She gestured toward the coffee she brought for me. I didn't move. I know things have felt complicated. She continued, "Transitions always are, but resistance just makes them harder." She paused, waiting for me to fill the silence. I didn't. Her smile twitched. "Well," she said, brushing invisible crumbs from her skirt, "I'll leave you to it. Then, just know we're here to help. Really." I watched her leave, that practiced grace never faltering. But the moment the door clicked shut, I walked upstairs, to the attic. It had been years since I'd opened the attic door. Dust blanketed the wooden floorboards like untouched snow. I pulled the string for the light and stepped carefully, avoiding the warped plank near the entry. I wasn't looking for anything specific, or maybe I was. I went through old boxes labeled Christmas, taxes, and Ephraim, high school. Then, in a shoebox buried beneath folded linens, I found something I hadn't thought about in over a decade, a small black digital recorder. Benedict used to carry it during inspections and site visits. I wasn't sure why I kept it. Habit, maybe. Grief, more likely. I brought it downstairs, dusted it off, and plugged it into charge. That night, While the house sat still and the wind scratched softly against the window panes, I pressed play. The first few files were work notes, dates, building codes, a reminder to call a plumber. Then came the one that changed everything. Benedict's voice, clear and deliberate Seraphine. I've told you before, Rowena will handle the estate. She built this life with me. I trust her. I sat still, fingers laced tightly around the base of the recorder. He went on. And no, I won't change the insurance. It's already settled. It was never meant for you. The recording ended. I played it again, then a third time. The power of the dead to defend the living is something no court of law can replicate. But that voice, his voice, held more authority than any document in a file drawer. I slept that night with the recorder on the nightstand. The next morning, I returned to Mr. Hatch's office, the recorder tucked in my purse like a sacred artifact. He greeted me with a tight nod. "I've been expecting you." I played the file for him. He listened without a word. Then he turned to his computer and pulled up the insurance documents Seraphine had filed just after Benedict's passing. He frowned. "This date doesn't make sense," he said, tapping the screen. "What do you mean?" He showed me. The policy had been changed a week after Benedict had been placed on heavy sedation, barely responsive. There's no way he approved this himself. Mr. Hatch murmured. I felt the tightness in my chest return. Not fear, but the slow rise of clarity. "Can we prove that I asked?" He nodded. "Yes. Back home." I printed out every legal record in the house copies of the will, the deed, the insurance form, the revised dates. I sealed the recorder in a plastic bag. I wrote down everything. And in my planner, under today's date, I scrawled in all caps, "Fraud can be quiet too." They had tried to take my name, my home, and now my husband's final wishes. But they underestimated one thing. I was still here. And now, I had proof. I stood at the fax machine in the corner of the UPS store, the fluorescent lights humming above me, a dull reminder that I was doing something irreversible. My fingers trembled only slightly as I fed in the pages, photocopies of Benedict's insurance documents, the altered timeline, and most importantly, the transcription of his voice. "Rowena will handle the estate." I trust her. At the top of the final page, just beneath the header for Zinnia Corwin, investigative journalist, Baton Rouge Chronicle, I scrawled a note in block letters, "The woman who built the house." No name, no number, just that. By the time I returned home, there was already a message in my inbox, Zinnia's office. Subject line: confirmation received, requesting interview. They didn't need to know my face to recognize a truth that screamed louder than silence. The press event was being held at a community hall on Oak Street, one of those well-lit, overly carpeted rooms that doubled as a wedding venue or PTA hub. Seraphine Sandra, as she introduced herself to most, stood at the podium wearing her usual polished smirk and a cream blazer. The banner behind her read, "Elder Care Estate Planning Building, a Legacy of Compassion." I sat in the third row, toward the aisle, not hiding, but not standing up either. I didn't need a microphone. I brought facts. Zinnia entered midway through Seraphine's speech. She wasn't dressed like the press. No badge, no camera crew, just a notebook, a flash drive, and presence. When Seraphine said, "In the final months of care, clarity matters more than ever," Zinnia raised her hand. Would clarity include misrepresenting a legal heir's role? A pause, a ripple. "I'm sorry," Seraphine said, eyes narrowing. Zinnia stood. "Because I've received documents contradicting your version of events, including a notarized deed, a voice recording from Benedict Voss, and proof of forged insurance updates dated after he was sedated." The room went still. Seraphine blinked. I don't know what year Zinnia inserted the flash drive into the community projector laptop. On screen appeared Benedict's voice waveform. Then came the sound, "Rowena deserves everything. She gave me everything." Gasps. Phones raised. Seraphine stepped back. "That recording," Zinnia said calmly, "was made 2 weeks before Mr. Voss was placed in hospice care. It names Rowena Voss as sole intended heir." A man in the back mumbled, "Isn't that his wife?" Someone else asked. "Who's this Seraphine then?" Seraphine's jaw worked silently. She reached toward the mic. Zinnia didn't stop her. She didn't have to, because Ephraim had already stormed out the side door. And Callista. She turned her face away, whispering something to a friend like none of this had anything to do with her. I walked home in the late afternoon sun, the air sticky but light. My feet moved without rush, without urgency. For the first time in months, I didn't feel hunted. Inside. I boiled water for tea, this time letting it steep longer than usual. My hands didn't tremble. My spine didn't bend. I sat at the kitchen table and listened again to Benedict's voice. Not because I needed proof anymore, but because I missed the sound of someone who had believed me without being told why he should. "You gave me the house," I whispered aloud. "I'll take back the rest." That night, I opened the drawer beneath the hallway phone and pulled out 3 empty folders. On each, I wrote in black pen, "Lawyer Children Court." I filled each with copies of the deed, the forged timeline, and the audio transcription. I even added the sticky note, "Fraud can be quiet too." Then, on top of every folder, I wrote one more sentence calm. Centered facts don't need family approval. I placed the folders in my bag and zipped it closed. Tomorrow, I would not go to war. I would go to work. The courthouse smelled of old wood and floor polish. I arrived early, dressed in the navy blue suit Benedict once called my go-get-'em uniform. It was tailored just enough to make me sit straighter and walk like I had a place to be, because I did. The East Baton Rouge Parish Courthouse stood like a silent sentinel, unimpressed by theatrics or sentiment. I sat alone on the right side of the courtroom, my purse on my lap, hands clasped, breathing slow. Across the aisle sat Sandra Seraphine, flanked by her attorney, dressed like she was attending a fundraiser rather than a civil hearing. When the clerk called the case, I stood without hesitation. My name sounded calm in the room. Not one of my children joined me. The first witness called was Ms. Carlin, my neighbor for over 3 decades. She stepped up to the stand with that same stoop and certainty she carried through every neighborhood watch meeting she'd ever organized. She walks every morning at 7, she told the judge, rain or shine. Keeps a garden that's the envy of the whole block. Still writes notes on her grocery lists. Not the kind you have to manage, the kind you ask advice from. The judge leaned forward. "She's not a confused old lady, Ms." Carlin said, voice steady. "She's the smartest woman on our street." Sandra's pen scratched furiously on her legal pad. Her attorney stared at the floor. When it came time to submit evidence, I stood and passed forward the folder marked court. Inside was the notarized timeline, the full estate record, and the audio file of Benedict's voice, his words crisp and final. "Rowena deserves everything. She gave me everything." The judge listened with no visible reaction. He didn't need to react. He needed to weigh. Sandra's lawyer tried to object. "There seems to have been some miscommunication," he offered, voice thin. "Miscommunication doesn't produce forged signatures," the judge replied, glancing at the date mismatches and the irregular co-management filings. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But I stood taller. Ephraim sat behind Sandra, hands in his lap. Callista beside him, her eyes flicking between the judge and her phone. Leora to their left, looked directly at me. When our eyes met, she nodded once small, but sure. The judge turned to the children. Do any of you believe your mother is incapable of managing her own affairs? The silence crackled like static. Ephraim cleared his throat. No, sir, he mumbled. Callista looked at the ceiling. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Voss, would you like to add anything? I shook my head. I think I've said what matters. The ruling came swiftly. The guardianship petition is hereby dismissed as frivolous and unfounded, the judge said. Full estate authority is reinstated to Rowena Voss, per original documentation and expressed intent of the deceased. Sandra flinched. Her attorney started to speak, but the judge cut him off. This courtroom will not tolerate weaponized family law. The gavel hit wood. I exhaled. Not relief. Release. In the hallway, Sandra approached me. Her heels clicked too fast, like they were trying to catch up with control. Rowena, she started. I raised my hand, open palm, firm. No, she froze. Then stepped back. Outside. The sun had moved past its peak. The courthouse steps glowed in amber light. As I descended them, each footfall felt grounded not in vengeance, not in anger, but in truth. Not everyone who stands alone is lonely. Some of us just aren't taking anyone else's lies with us. The house was quiet again, not the kind of quiet that comes after a fight or a funeral, but the kind that settles in when something finally finds its right shape. I walked barefoot across the living room, the floorboards cool under my soles. Sunlight poured through the east windows. Landing in long strips across the wood boards, Benedict and I had refinished ourselves one spring when the kids were still young and the world felt small in a good way. There were no meetings on the calendar, no lawyers to call, no strangers walking through what used to be my home, pretending they knew better. I opened the cabinet above the fireplace, inside, behind a stack of mismatched candle holders, was the photo of Benedict and me on our wedding day. I hadn't put it there. Someone must have returned it quietly, without a word. I held it in my hands for a moment, letting the silence breathe between us. Then I placed it back on the mantel, centered, clean, and visible. Later that morning, while sorting through Benedict's old desk drawers, I found something wedged behind the last divider. An envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed, addressed in his handwriting to be read only if I'm gone before we speak again. My breath caught. I sat down and opened it carefully, like something sacred. Inside was a letter. Ro, if you're reading this, it means I waited too long to say what I should have said. I let Seraphine get too close. Not in a way that threatened us, but in a way that blurred things for the kids. She's sharp, yes, but she doesn't know love the way you do. I didn't know how to fix it without hurting everyone, so I stayed silent. I trusted that you'd know how to protect what matters. I should have done more. I'm sorry. This house, this life we built it, not them. Never forget that. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. I folded it back slowly and slid it into the drawer, this time near the top. By noon, I had begun returning things to where they belonged. The blue curtains with the magnolia print hung. The photo of Seraphine and Benedict at the company picnic removed. The labels in the spice cabinet that said Mom's Corner in handwriting that wasn't mine peeled off. I placed family heirlooms back on their shelves, my grandmother's music box, the chipped rooster bowl from Aunt Lorna. I scrubbed the marks from Seraphine's planner on the whiteboard in the kitchen, line by careful line. When I stepped outside to water the garden, Miss Carlin was walking past. She handed me a container of lemon bars and a small note. "We never doubted you," it said. Later that afternoon, while trimming the hedges along the driveway, A delivery van pulled up. A young man hopped out and glanced at me. "Are you the housekeeper?" he asked. I looked at him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "No," I said. "I'm the owner." His face flushed. "I'm so sorry." "Ma'am, I just assumed it's all right," I said, not unkindly. People see what they expect. He handed me the box, nodded, and left. I watched him drive away, not with anger, but with understanding. Sometimes you have to say who you are out loud, even when it should be obvious. That evening, I sat by the window with a mug of tea and pulled out a sheet of stationery. I began writing. Ephraim, Callista, Leora. This is not a letter asking for apology. I don't need one. This is to tell you what I will and won't allow, now and going forward. You are always welcome in this home, but not if you think I need permission to live in it. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in an envelope. Not to send, to save. The knock came just after 9, soft and uncertain. I had been pruning the dead leaves off the jade plant in the living room. When I opened the door, Callista stood on the porch holding a pie in one hand and a bouquet of grocery store flowers in the other. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her tone was light, rehearsed. "We just wanted to check on you." Not, "I'm sorry." I nodded once, stepped back, and let her in. No embrace, no welcome. Just the sound of her shoes on the hardwood. She placed the pie on the counter like it was a peace offering. I didn't unwrap it. We sat at the kitchen table. I made coffee. She added too much sugar. "You've kept everything just like it was," she said, glancing around. "Looks just like Dad remembered it." I didn't correct her. Benedict hadn't remembered the house. He had lived in it, built it with me, bled and laughed in it. She stirred her coffee. "So, how have you been managing?" The pause after the question carried more weight than the question itself. I looked her in the eye. "Fine," I said. "I know where everything is." She nodded, smiled faintly, as if she expected more. I didn't give it. After 15 minutes, she stood, said she had errands. I walked her to the door. "Callista," I said as she stepped onto the porch. She turned. "Thank you for the pie." Her smile faltered just slightly before she walked away. 2 days later, I saw Ephraim in the parking lot of the grocery store. He was coming out as I was going in, holding a bag of oranges and a 6-pack of beer. He stopped. "Mom." I raised an eyebrow but kept walking. He jogged a few steps to fall in beside me. "Let me help with that," he offered, reaching for my tote bag. "I've got it," I said, not unkindly. He hesitated, then fell back a pace. "I didn't know it would go that far," he said quietly. "We just thought." He trailed off. I turned to him, stopping mid-stride. "You didn't ask me," I said. "That was the problem." He looked down. "You're right." We stood there a moment longer. Then I turned and walked inside, leaving him in the lot, oranges shifting in his bag. That night, I sat at my desk, pulled out a clean sheet of paper, and wrote across the top things you should have asked before deciding for me. I listed everything: the bank account, the house title, the lawyer, the pills I stopped taking without telling them. The voice I still had. I didn't write out anger. I wrote out grief. I wrote until the list became a page, then 2. Then I folded the letter, gently, and placed it inside an old recipe box in the pantry labeled Christmas. It was the box Benedict and I had used for decades, filled with handwritten cards, secret family ingredients, and 2 coupons from a cafe that closed in '94. It felt like the right place for the unsent. The next morning, Ms. Carlin arrived with a loaf of homemade bread still warm in the foil. She handed it to me with both hands like something sacred. We sat on the porch, not needing small talk. "I never asked," she said after a while. But did Sandra ever try to get me to sign anything? I looked at her. She stopped by a few months back. She continued. Had papers. Said it was routine, some form about your care. She asked if I thought you were declining. And I told her no, Carlin said simply. I told her you raised 3 kids, managed a home, survived grief, paid taxes on time, and remembered birthdays better than I did. I laughed, and so did she. That's not incompetence. She said, that's mastery. I didn't reply, but I smiled not with joy, but with recognition. I opened the curtains slowly, letting morning light flood the kitchen in soft gold. The air smelled like clean floors and early spring, tinged with lavender from the soap I used the night before. I put on the kettle and turned the radio dial until I found a classical station, Benedict's favorite, heavy on cello. This was mine again. All of it. The kitchen was quiet, not silent, filled with the comforting clatter of dishes, the bubbling of the kettle, the distant call of a bird outside. I watered the small patch of herbs beneath the window, basil, thyme, and the roses Benedict had planted for my birthday more than 20 years ago. A neighbor passed by and waved through the window. I waved back. No one was measuring my posture or tone anymore. There were no hidden recorders or legal traps, just tea and soil and light. In the attic, I had been sorting through old folders for donation when I found it, wedged between 2 faded binders. In an envelope, I recognized immediately Benedict's handwriting. I opened it slowly. The original will. Not a copy. Not notarized by someone else's hand. His and his alone. It named me Rowena Voss, sole beneficiary of all assets and property. No amendments, no surprises. I held it against my chest for a moment, not because I needed proof anymore, but because the truth deserves a place, even when it's no longer in dispute. I placed the document in the safe at the back of my closet, not because I doubted the court, because it belonged there, next to the deeds and birth certificates and photo negatives, because it was his last full sentence. You never meant to leave me fighting. I murmured into the still air, but I finished it. That afternoon, I hosted tea in the backyard. Just a few neighbors, Miss Carlin, Mr. Langston from 2 doors down, and a couple from the next street I hadn't seen since before the court battle. They brought tomato seedlings and homemade biscuits. I served iced tea with lemon and sat in a folding chair beneath the magnolia tree. No one mentioned the lawsuit. No one asked about Seraphine or the recording or the judge. Someone brought up the local paper, where an article had run with my name, but I waved it off and offered more honey instead. Peace doesn't need explanation. Leora came first. She stood at the door, laundry basket in hand, and said, I figured you might want company while folding. We didn't speak much while we worked. At one point, she said, you were right, Mom, about all of it. I nodded. That was enough. Later, 2 cards arrived in the mail, one from Ephraim, one from Callista. Neither said I'm sorry, but both said, in nearly identical handwriting, we respect your boundaries and hope you're well. I placed them in the kitchen drawer where I keep warranties and take-out menus. Good, I said aloud. Let them stay there. As the sun began to set, I sat on the porch with Benedict's old radio next to me. It clicked and hummed as it warmed up, then released a low, steady string of cello notes. The magnolia leaves rustled in the breeze. The windows behind me glowed softly. I pulled out my journal and wrote one final line for the day. This house stood not because I inherited it, but because I refused to abandon it. I closed the book not as an end, but like someone folding a letter to reread later. The fireflies began blinking in the yard. I leaned back in the chair. Let the night come. I didn't think of what had been taken anymore. I thought of what remained. They thought I was too old to fight, too quiet to be heard. But here I am still standing in the home I built, not because someone gave it to me, but because I refuse to be erased. If you're watching this, maybe you're facing something similar. Maybe someone's tried to make you feel small, powerless, or past your time. Don't believe them. You are not invisible. You are not disposable. You are not done. This story isn't just about one house. It's about boundaries, voice, and dignity. And maybe it's a reminder that sometimes we don't have to yell to be powerful. We just have to keep showing up. So, let me ask you, have you ever had to reclaim something that was already yours? What did it teach you about yourself? If this video moved you, if it touched a part of your own story, leave a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't land with you, I still want to hear what didn't sit right. What would you have done differently? And hey, if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and full of truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and follow along. This house stood, and so will you.